What's going on, everybody? Khalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. This is pros and cons for the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some of my favorite and least favorite things about this phone to help you decide whether or not it's the right one for you. Now, if you want to learn more about this phone after the video, be sure to check out my full review and tips and tricks videos for it on the channel. And for the latest up-to-date pricing, this information is always changing, so don't forget to check out the link for that in the video description. But with that being said, let's get started. So my first pro for the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 is that it has NFC. Now, in case you don't know what it is, NFC is the technology behind contactless mobile payment services, stuff like Google Pay, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Amex Pay, all that. And while obviously you're not going to be using Samsung Pay or Apple Pay on a Motorola, you can of course still make mobile contactless payments. So if you do like to use tap and pay features, then for the first time with a Moto G phone, you actually will be able to do that with this phone. Now, I don't really know why Motorola was so late to the party when it comes to NFC, because before this phone, no Moto G phones sold in the US actually had that feature, and meanwhile, pretty much every single Samsung phone that came out in 2022 does have NFC, as well as a bunch of really entry-level random unbranded phones, like for example the Cricket Dream 5G, that phone has NFC, some Blue phones do. So really, the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 is one of the last phones to actually get NFC when you compare it to other phones in the same price range. But honestly, that aside, it's much better late than never, so I am really glad that finally we're getting NFC with a new Motorola phone. My second pro for the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 is the camera. Now, to give you a quick rundown of the camera features here, we got a nice looking hole punch design for the front facing camera, and this camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as features go, this phone has pretty much every feature you could ask for in a mid-range phone, and I especially like how they combine the ultra wide camera and the macro camera into one. It doesn't really change the functionality, but it is really cool, and I am glad we're getting both features. So in general, if you're taking lots of photos and you want a wider variety of features, maybe you want to get close-up detailed images, but at the same time you also want to get wider angle photos, maybe a picture of buildings, group photos, scenery photos, whatever the case may be, having all these features is definitely nice if you're taking a lot of photos. In addition to this, not only does this phone have a ton of different camera features, but the photo quality itself is also really good. Now of course, you're not going to be doing professional photography on this phone, and it's nowhere near the level of something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra or an iPhone 13 Pro Max, but at the same time, for a decently affordable mid-range phone, the photo quality with this camera setup is actually really good. To give you an idea of what this camera can do, here's a photo taken with the main camera of the phone, and keep in mind this is just the regular camera, no special modes, no portrait mode, nothing like that, and it does look really nice. The details are really sharp, it actually looks pretty professional, the photo itself is decently bright, and the colors look really good. So if you're taking photos for something like social media, for example, you're definitely going to get some nice pictures with this phone. My third pro for this phone is the display. Now on one hand, this display is not perfect by any means, which is something we're going to get to later in the cons, but for the most part, under normal circumstances, the Moto G Stylus 5G really has a good looking display. So with this phone, we're getting a 6.8 inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and an 85.8% screen to body ratio. So first of all, this display is really large. At 6.8 inches, it's one of the largest displays you can get in a smartphone. And in addition to this, it's not only large, but we also got a real good aspect ratio here. At 20.5:9, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor, and that's going to be good for a couple different reasons. First of all, if you're doing something in landscape mode, like for example, watching a video, you're going to get a much more immersive experience. And then if you're doing something like reading, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, having a tall and narrow form factor like this is definitely a nice thing. In addition to the size and dimensions, the actual quality of the image itself is also really good. With a resolution of 1080p, we're getting a nice, sharp, crisp image. And that's of course going to be great for any kind of content consumption. And not only that, but the 120Hz refresh rate is going to make movement on the screen a little bit faster and smoother. So if you're streaming videos, playing games, or even just navigating through the phone itself, you're going to get a much better experience, things are going to be a little bit smoother, and it's just going to feel more premium. So if you consume a lot of content, whether you're watching videos, playing games, looking at photos, or maybe you're just browsing the web and reading and stuff like that, the display on this phone is going to be good for pretty much anything. My fourth pro for this phone is the storage. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting 256 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so we're really getting a lot of space here. To put this into perspective, the iPhone 13, which is a lot more expensive than this phone, starts out at 128 gigabytes, and that phone, being an iPhone, doesn't have microSD card expansion. So with the Moto G Stylus 5G, not only are we getting double the internal storage that the iPhone starts at, but again, we do get microSD card expansion here. So if you're taking a lot of photos and videos and it's really filling up space, which honestly, you would need a lot of photos and videos for it to do that, you can always offload that stuff and even some app data onto a microSD card, and obviously this is going to expand your storage even more. So for the average user, or even a power user for that matter, it's pretty unlikely that you're ever going to have to worry about storage on this phone. My fifth pro for this phone is the processor. Now with this phone, we're getting 8 gigabytes of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. Obviously, it really goes without saying this is a 5G phone, so of course, if you want access to your carrier's 5G network and the latest and greatest technology, then you're definitely going to want a 5G phone like this. Now that being said, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 672 and a multi-core score of 1917. Now, if you're not really familiar with this kind of test, it might not mean a whole lot to you, so what I recommend doing is running a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on your current phone and comparing the results to these to see whether or not this phone would be an upgrade for you, because who knows, depending on what you have, your phone might actually be faster than this. But I can tell you, just from having run this test on so many different phones, this is actually a pretty fast score, and in my experience using this phone, I've had no performance issues whatsoever, and I've been doing a decent amount of things on it, from stuff like social media, streaming content like videos and music, and even doing stuff like mobile gaming. Everything is run really well on this phone. Now of course, if you're doing something higher end like playing Fortnite or editing videos for example, this phone might struggle a little bit, and of course it's going to be nowhere near as fast as a flagship phone, but at the same time, for more normal everyday activities like using social media, browsing the web, playing a few more simple games, and doing stuff like streaming videos and music, this phone is going to get the job done perfectly fine, and when it comes to processing power, most people are probably not going to need anything more than this. But now that we've gone over some of the good things about this phone, let's talk about some of the not so good things. So my first con for this phone is that it can't shoot 4K videos. Now this is a really weird thing about this phone, because pretty much every single other phone in this price range and actually a little bit below can shoot 4K videos, so it doesn't really make any logical sense to me why Motorola wouldn't give this phone the ability to shoot 4K videos, especially considering the older Moto G Stylus, not even the Moto G Stylus 5G, but the 4G version that came out in February of 2021 actually did have the ability to shoot 4K videos, but they took it away and never brought it back. And to emphasize this point, I got a Samsung Galaxy A33 5G right here. This phone at full retail price is almost $200 less than the Moto G Stylus 5G, and as you can see right here, I am actually able to record videos in 4K with this phone, whereas again, with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, as far as video resolution goes, we are limited to 1080p. Now one bright side to this is you can record videos at 60 frames per second, so having access to a higher frame rate is a nice thing, but at the same time, if you're recording lots of videos and you want the best quality you can get, you can do better than this phone, especially in this price range, considering almost every other phone that competes with this can actually record 4K videos. My second con for this phone is that the display is a little hard to see outside. Now this is obviously pretty situational, because if you're not outside a lot, this is obviously not going to affect you at all. But at the same time, I do think a fair amount of people do spend at least a decent amount of time outside. And let me tell you, when you're in the sun, especially with sunglasses, the display of this phone is nearly impossible to see in landscape mode. So if you're on vacation, for example, and you're trying to get a good picture, then you're basically going to have to take off your sunglasses to see anything. So this is a pretty annoying thing about this phone. And I don't know, it could just be specific sunglasses too, since after all, living in Arizona where it's pretty much sunny all the time, I have polarized sunglasses, so I'm actually not sure what this phone looks like when you're wearing non-polarized sunglasses, but just keep in mind, if you're going to be outside a lot, especially in the sun wearing sunglasses, despite this phone's display being good in pretty much every other way, not being able to see it in certain lighting is definitely one big downside. Now my third con for this phone is that there's no wireless charging. Now on one hand, is this really that big a deal? Not really, because wireless charging, while it is a nice feature to have, isn't really going to change your life. But at the same time, there are plenty of other phones, some being quite a bit cheaper than this one, that do have wireless charging. And at full retail price, this phone is actually approaching the level of something like the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, for example, which, although that phone is still a little bit more expensive than this, is a flagship phone and it does have features like wireless charging. And again, wireless charging in and of itself is not exactly a feature that's a huge game changer or anything, but it is a nice thing to have, and it's something that manufacturers seem to leave out intentionally, even though it's not that crazy of a feature. And while a lot of people don't really seem to see the value in it, wireless charging can definitely be a nice thing to have. For example, if you spend a lot of time at a desk, it might be nice to have your phone charging at all times, and having too many wires on a desk can make things a little cluttered, so having a wireless charger to set your phone down on is definitely a nice thing to have. And in addition to this, if your charging port breaks, without wireless charging, you're basically going to have to either repair your phone or just get a new one. And with the phone in this price range, it may not even be worth it to fix it. But with wireless charging, of course, if your charging port breaks, unless you have to do some sort of data transfer, you can just charge your phone with a wireless charger instead, and that way you can keep it a little longer without having to replace it. So in general, is wireless charging really that huge of a feature? Not really, but in my opinion, that's all the more reason why pretty much every phone in this price range should have it. Now my fourth con for this phone is that the fast charging really isn't that strong. Now with this phone, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15 watt fast charging, so those specs are not bad by any means. In fact, the battery is actually pretty much the largest battery you can get in a smartphone, so you are going to get a ton of battery life. In this phone, fast charger or not, does charge up pretty fast. But that being said, price range wise, unless you're getting a good deal or something like that, this phone is really not that cheap. And I want to say the vast majority of phones in this price range have at least 18 watt fast charging, if not 25. So sure, by itself, the fast charging on this phone really isn't bad, but compared to the majority of the competitors, having only 15 watt fast charging in a nearly $500 phone definitely makes you question what kind of value you're actually getting for your money. Now my fifth and final con for this phone is the stylus sensitivity. Now before I go on with this, to be fair, this stylus is actually quite a bit better than the previous stylus that we saw on the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021. This 2022 generation of the Moto G Stylus phones definitely has seen a decent amount of improvement, mostly in the sense that it's not absolutely horrible. But as you can see here, the stylus still isn't really that good. If you're trying to do any serious art or anything like that on it, you're definitely gonna be disappointed, because this stylus really is only good for taking really simple handwritten notes, stuff like that. And if you're in a situation where you actually want to draw with it, or even play a game or something like that, I wouldn't say this stylus is really that useful in that situation. But then again, this is still only a mid-range phone, and if you really want to do serious art or anything like that on your phone, then you're most likely going to have to get something quite a bit higher end. But those were my pros and cons for the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. In general, despite a few more minor shortcomings, I do think this phone is a really good device that provides quite a bit of value despite being a little bit on the pricey side. Now once again, if you do want to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out my full review and tips and tricks videos for it, where I go more in depth about its features and value. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And once again, for the latest up-to-date pricing, be sure to check out the link in the video description, because this is always changing. But that's it for this video. As always, I will see you in the next one.